The world watched in horror as Sudan, a nation in northeast Africa, plunged into chaos. The images were stark and unsettling, capturing the attention of millions around the globe. It was April 15th, 2023, a date that would be etched into the annals of history. Gunfire erupted in the capital city of Khartoum, shattering a fragile peace. The sounds of conflict echoed through the streets, sending waves of panic among the residents. This was not just another clash in a troubled region, this was different. The scale and intensity of the violence were unprecedented, signaling a deeper and more dangerous conflict. This was the beginning of a full-scale war. Explosions and heavy gunfire became the new normal, transforming once bustling neighborhoods into war zones. Sudan, a country already scarred by years of internal conflict, was now facing its greatest challenge yet. The infrastructure, already weakened by previous conflicts, began to crumble under the new onslaught. Two powerful military factions, once partners in a shaky government, turned on each other. Their alliance, always tenuous, shattered completely, plunging the nation into deeper turmoil. Their weapons of war, tanks, artillery and fighter jets, all unleashed on a terrified population. The sheer firepower on display was overwhelming, leaving civilians in a state of constant fear. The fighting spread with terrifying speed. What began in Khartoum quickly escalated, engulfing towns and cities across the nation. From Khartoum, it engulfed other parts of the country, particularly the Darfur region. This area, already fraught with its own history of violence, became a focal point of the conflict. This western region had already witnessed a genocide in the early 2000s. The scars of that dark period were still fresh, and now history seemed to be repeating itself. Now the specter of mass violence returned to haunt its people. Refugee camps swelled with new arrivals, each with harrowing tales of survival. As the world grappled with this sudden eruption of violence, one question echoed: how did Sudan, a nation yearning for stability, descend so rapidly into the abyss of war? The international community watched, debated, and wondered if there was any hope for peace. The conflict in Sudan is not just another African war. It is a complex and multifaceted crisis that has deep historical roots and far-reaching consequences. It is a humanitarian catastrophe unfolding in real time, with innocent civilians bearing the brunt of the violence and chaos. This is a crisis that demands the world's attention and immediate action from the international community. The human cost is staggering, with countless lives lost and families torn apart. Thousands have been killed, and the death toll continues to rise with each passing day. Over 2 million people have been forced to flee their homes, leaving behind everything they know and love. Families, many with young children, are making perilous journeys to escape the fighting, often with little more than the clothes on their backs. They are seeking refuge in neighboring countries that are already struggling with their own challenges, adding to the regional strain. This conflict also has the potential to ignite a wider regional conflagration, destabilizing an already volatile area. Sudan sits at a strategic crossroads in Africa, making its stability crucial for the entire continent. Its neighbors, including Ethiopia, Chad, and South Sudan, are already grappling with instability and violence, which could be exacerbated by Sudan's turmoil. The spillover effects of Sudan's war, in terms of refugee flows, arms proliferation, and ethnic tensions, could be devastating for the region. The United Nations has issued urgent appeals for a ceasefire and humanitarian access, emphasizing the dire need for intervention. But the fighting continues, trapping civilians in a living nightmare with no end in sight. The world cannot afford to turn away from this crisis. The international community must act now. The stakes are simply too high, and the consequences of inaction could be catastrophic for Sudan and beyond. To understand the current conflict, we must delve into Sudan's troubled past, a history marred by decades of civil wars, coups, and political instability. In 2019, longtime dictator Omar al-Bashir was overthrown after months of popular protests. These protests were driven by widespread discontent over economic hardships and political repression. A transitional government, comprising civilian and military leaders, was formed with the promise of guiding Sudan towards democracy. This coalition was seen as a beacon of hope for many Sudanese citizens yearning for change. However, this fragile power-sharing agreement was built on shaky ground. The deep-seated mistrust between the civilian and military factions made cooperation difficult. At its heart lay a fundamental tension: a struggle for dominance between the Sudanese Armed Forces, or SAF, and the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, a powerful paramilitary group. This rivalry was not just about power, but also about control over resources and influence. The RSF, led by General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, better known as Hemeti, grew out of the notorious Janjaweed militias. These militias were infamous for their brutal tactics and human rights abuses. These militias were responsible for atrocities during the Darfur conflict, which left a lasting scar on the nation and its people. Hemeti, a former camel trader who rose to power through violence, had amassed significant wealth and influence. His rise was emblematic of the complex interplay between power, violence, and economic interests in Sudan. The proposed integration of the RSF into the regular army became a major sticking point. This proposal was seen as a threat to the RSF's autonomy and its lucrative control over various economic activities. The RSF resisted being absorbed into the SAF, fearing a loss of power and autonomy. This resistance further deepened the divide between the two factions. The civilian leadership, meanwhile, struggled to assert control over these heavily armed factions. Their efforts were often undermined by the entrenched interests and the sheer power wielded by the military groups. At the heart of this conflict are two men, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, known as Hemeti. Burhan, the de facto head of state since al-Bashir's ousting, leads the Sudanese armed forces. He is seen by many as representing the old guard, the military elite that has long held sway in Sudan. Hemeti, on the other hand, presents himself as a man of the people. He has exploited popular grievances, particularly economic hardship, to bolster his support. However, his brutal past and his ruthless ambition are well documented. The rivalry between these two generals has pushed Sudan to the brink. Each commands a powerful force. Their struggle for power is not just about control of the government, it is about control of Sudan's vast resources, including its gold mines. As these generals wage war on each other, it is the Sudanese people who are paying the price. Their dreams of democracy and a better future lie shattered amidst the ruins of their country.